we are live. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sandra Jennings, and this is Passion Speak, where we give those with a passion a platform to speak. My guest this evening is a gentleman who has pre-pandemic started his own company. He's going to talk to us about it. He's just written a book about reparations. I'm anxious to talk to him. He operates a leadership company out of Texas. He's nationwide and even international. And let me just bring right onto the stage Phil Claybrooke. Hi, Phil.
Hey, Sandra, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. So I'm excited to talk to you about this book on a question of reparations. But before we get started on your book, I want you to give us a little bit of a history on you and how you got to the point that you got to with the book.
I am one of those people that came through corporate America through what was known back years ago as the affirmative action program. So I entered corporate America at a very, very high level when I first entered. And during that time period, I learned that there were not many people that looked like me in that corporate environment, especially the industry I was in, because it was a manufacturing industry for controls for manufacturing processes. And things were said and done in some of those meetings that weren't quite kosher if you look at it from a racially sensitive or culturally sensitive responsive standpoint. Some of those things were unfavorable that some people said in those meetings. So that's where I started to think and begin to think about how do we create this belief for people that this outer appearance is who we are? Because we created that belief historically through disadvantages and advantages, either by laws or politically or marketing or whatever. But we've created this divisive or divisive, depending on what part of the country you're from, viewpoint that the outer appearance is really the person you're looking at when there's so much more to people than the outer appearance. And what I did as I went through corporate America and learned that there weren't many that looked like me, either female or male, I decided that there must be an issue that we need to address. And that issue is we need to get away from that outer appearance and we need to really interact and get to know people that may be different from us, whether that's ethnically, racially, gender-wise, sexual preferences, whatever that difference is. We need to get away from people that just look like us or act like us and get to know people that are different from us. And as I went through that exploration, I retired early to bring it fast forward from corporate America in 2016 because the more and more go ahead, I'm sorry.
Pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic. And I left corporate America. In fact, I left a little bit early and I told my CEO when I left, I've got to go do something that's really passionate and something in my heart to go do. And that was how do we create a more inclusive culture and how do we create a more inclusive environment, not just in the workplace, but also in any environment we're in, school environment, business environment, social environment, home environment. How do we create a more inclusive environment where people not only feel like they contribute, but also feel like they belong? So that's my short story for you.
So what was his answer when you said, I got to run, I got to bounce?
Give me one more month to get things repositioned, situated, and we'll support you. And he and I are still best friends to today.
So that must have been real terrifying because you were primary breadwinner in your home, yes?
It was more terrifying for my wife than me. And there's a story behind that, but I won't go too deep into it because I think she's watching tonight. So I have to have something to eat and sleep on when I get home. I prefer it not be the couch.
Got it.
But yeah, I was concerned because when you're leaving a fixed income where you know it's going to come in and it's pretty significant in terms of income and you reach out on your own, that income philosophy changes real quick. And that's what entrepreneurs should really understand and know. The road to entrepreneurship is not one that is always easy. In fact, most of the time for entrepreneurs, it's a little bit difficult at first. And so you have to really be prepared for that possibility of the worst and decide whether or not what you're doing is worth it. In my case, I've really decided it's worth it, and I'm so happy I did with the clients that we work with. Yes.
So from a perspective of you starting in 2016, um, how did the clientele list and the growth and the scaling of your company go? Did it go straight up? I mean, did you take dips and dives? How did you?
Absolutely, absolutely dips and dives. In fact, at one point I dove so low that I never want to go there again, to be honest with you. But that is pretty standard for entrepreneurs, and that's something we've got a class coming up very shortly on what we call our learning management system,
Mm-hmm.
and it is built for entrepreneurs to help build their planning so they don't have as many pitfalls in their pursuit and their journey as an entrepreneur. So we can talk about that a little bit later too.
Okay.
But that's on our online system. It's in development. It's almost finished, and it will be released on our online training system in January.
Okay. Before we go into some of the metrics to results, that's the name of your company. I want to go back to 2016, pre-pandemic. So you're doing okay, ups and downs like usual, and then the pandemic hits. How did
Yes,
it
we
go
did.
for you? I mean, was that shock?
We were fortunate because before the pandemic hit, and if you believe in divine intervention, it must have happened to me because before the pandemic hit, we were already moving to virtual training, and we had already set up this. In fact, I'm sitting in the studio right now. Uh,
Hmm.
we had set up virtual training to actually perform some of our workshops with our clients virtually because some of them are long distance and travel is expensive for our clients to put us on a plane to take us to train their people when in fact we can provide the same training here out of the studio with just about as much effect and favorable with results as in person.
Okay. I'm going to your website and I'm going to look at some of your client lists. Um, I see a lot. In fact, when I went to YouTube, you do have your YouTube that you guys have just launched, and we're going to show a clip of that in a bit. But right now, I want to look. I look at your when I search your name in YouTube, you come up in various different spots, actively teaching or addressing the clients. So I see. So now you're based in Texas,
Yes, we're just
and you
north of
have
Dallas.
say again.
We're just north of Dallas.
North of Dallas. Okay, so I see on your client list, um, NPR, the County of Dallas, um, Texas Legends basketball, Salt Lake City School District. Who? I mean, you have Allen ISD. That's a intermittent, uh, some school district, I think. Allen
Yes.
School District. And then I want to talk about you got Americans Chamber for Business, but I want to talk about a few of these. I see the Great Seal of the Chickasaw Nation, and if anybody's curious, I'm reading from his website, his some of his client lists. What is Chickasaw Nation, and how does that feed into your platform?
Well, let me talk about the two sovereign nation clients we have.
Hmm.
One's the Chickasaw, and one is the Choctaw.
Okay.
And both hired us because of pretty similar circumstances.
Hmm.
Both of these nations, because of their casinos here in Oklahoma, just north of us on the border,
Hmm.
have a substantial employee count. One has like 14,000 employees, the other has 16,000 employees.
Okay.
So all these employees are not from the nation or either nation. Some of these people are people that are not even Native Americans. So one of the things that was troubling the nations, both the Chickasaw and the Choctaw, is how do they maintain the culture of their tribe and hire all the people from the outside and help them train and indoctrinate them in terms of expectations of their culture. Because both the tribes, both the Choctaw and the Chickasaw, have a spiritual culture, a family culture, and a culture of giving and learning. And they wanted to make sure they incorporated that culture within new hires and people that they bring in the organization. So they actually hired us to train their trainers to perform our programs.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. I'm actually kind of impressed that that, that the nations would be so progressive.
Yes, and I tell you, as a client in a culture, I I'm going to say this. I hope my other clients aren't insulted, but as a culture, the two sovereign nations we work with,
Hmm.
I fit more culturally with than probably any other client because of their beliefs, their values, and the way they see themselves.
I really like that. I really like that. We have a comment. Elisa. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for dropping in. She's a friend of mine, Phil, so she oftentimes will drop in as she's passing through and watch some of our broadcasts. I appreciate her and anyone else for that matter. Um, I want to talk about your book because that's what we've been biting at the bit to get to. And I want to do a screen share because I have a clip of you on YouTube that addresses it, kind of intros the book real nice. So I'm just going to play it real quick here. I really like it.
Hello, I want to introduce you to our most recent book in the Bus Stop series. And we call it the Bus Stop series because the bus has represented many things historically. We use it metaphorically to share that many of us have sat in different seats on that bus historically in the United States. The term bus stop in the first edition is a bus stop to look at the question of reparations. The book, The Question of Reparations, really dives into a holistic viewpoint from many perspectives on number one, what reparations might be, what they might look like, and how our approach and our opinion regarding reparations may vary between different people in the U.S. We encourage you to read this book. We think it will provide a great understanding of what the term reparations really means, and also provide a holistic approach to look at education, health, and wealth that might be looked at in terms of reparational approaches versus ethnicity, race, gender, and other appearances. We hope you enjoy the book. We look forward to producing the second book in the Bus Stop series sometime in the February 2022 timeframe. So with that, please become a reader and absorb our information in the current book, The Question of Reparations.
Nice. That was nice. Okay, so what exactly is reparations? Or if you wish, tell us a little bit more about what you're trying to get across in the book.
Well, let's start with what is reparations, because everybody's not familiar with the term reparations. But very simply, reparations, the word stands for repair, basically. And when we talk about reparations, it's how do we repair some of the cultural and ethnic mistakes we've made in the past in our history, such as slavery, such as taking land from Native Americans, such as the Chinese being forced to work on the railroad, such as Japanese being put in internment camps during the Japanese War, Mexicans directly after we conquered and took over Texas and New Mexico and Colorado, those residents that stayed in the United States and became residents, how we kicked them out, about 92,000 of them, sent them back to Mexico, took their land. So reparations is how do we now approach history and help repair the damage done to those groups historically that we have disadvantaged. So that's what reparations is, repair.
Okay, so it's not, well, I won't say what it's not because people are very sensitive about the whole subject of reparations.
Yes, yeah.
So in your book, which I have not read, you're talking about the question of reparations. What are you trying to get across to us?
Well, the question is, who is really entitled to reparations? And we've sort of approached that in many different ways over the several years. Some say it's people that were affected by slavery, Black African Americans. Some say it was Native Americans whose land was taken from them. Some say it was the Japanese who were put in internment camps. Some say it's Mexicans who were kicked out of the country after they became citizens because people thought they were taking their jobs back in the 1800s. Some say it's the Chinese who were forced to build the railroads. So the book talks about who is really entitled to reparations, because we've looked at it primarily as a reparation to slavery. But there are other cultures and other ethnic groups that feel they're also entitled to reparations. So the book says, let's take a holistic approach. Because when we've looked at reparations in terms of giving the entitled group, ethnically or racially, some type of compensation or some type of money, it has never passed the Senate. It's never passed Congress. It's never been signed by a president. And even though people have protested for reparations. So the book suggests, why don't we take a different approach? Let's not look at ethnicity. Let's not look at race. Let's not look at everything that's happened in past history. Let's look at the current situation of our underserved communities, which is the combination of white Caucasians, Black African Americans, Mexicans, all kinds of people who are economically or socially disadvantaged. And most of those happen to be in urban communities, not the suburban communities and rural communities. So the book talks about, let's take a different approach. Let's look at the health, let's look at the wealth, and let's look at the education perspective in those underserved communities, both urban and rural, versus looking at race and ethnic background.
Okay. So it's basically, all right. Talk to me some more about it, because I mean, what is your belief? I personally want to just interject this. I believe poverty should be a public health crisis. I think, and I'm not suggesting that the government should bail out all people in poverty. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying that it needs to be a national priority, whether it's health, whether it's from a wealth or education standpoint. I think that it should rank right up there with opioids, how opioids affects various communities, right?
Yeah, and I think what's happened, Sandra, too, with a lot of people in many cases have equated reparations with some type of moral conviction or some type of moral responsibility or moral accountability. And they haven't really looked at the economic impact. Now, when you think about it holistically, the birth rate in the United States is decreasing. People are not having as many children as they used to have. Period. It's fact, it's data, it's there for you to see. However, older people, 35 to my age, and older, have had that many children. Okay, or they are the children of families known as the baby boomers. That's what we are, the baby boomers.
I'm a boomer.
Okay, so what happens when the people retiring or the people reaching age of retirement outnumber the people working?
We got issues.
If you got lower birth rates currently and you've got higher birth rates in the past, somewhere down the line, the number of people productively providing tax revenue, providing labor force, providing the income stream necessary to support this country is going to decrease. So we need to find a pool of people to, number one, increase that labor force, and number two, increase the amount of tax revenue available. And that pool of people is sitting in underserved communities. We need those people productive. We need those people producing income. And we need people less dependent in that area in terms of welfare and entitlement systems.
So inclusion is about an economic base.
Inclusion is about economics as well as it's about moral. In fact, it's more about economics when you look at it, because we're digging our own tunnel if we're not investing in people to educate, to increase the health and welfare, and to put them in a position to earn solid income and produce tax revenue.
Okay. Real quick about back to the question of reparations. There are some ethnic groups who have received reparation packages from the government, like
yes, the Japanese did.
Say again.
The Japanese did it at $20,000 under, I think it's under President Reagan, if I remember correctly. The families that are affected by the internment camps, those families received $20,000 for each family.
And then I don't know about other states, but in Michigan, the offspring of some Native American tribes get free tuition. Now, that's not free room and board and tuition, but free tuition in public universities, colleges, and universities. And so I've heard it said that if you just gave free tuition to a population, you could economically turn around that population. Like you wouldn't need welfare programs necessarily. But you're going to talk about welfare programs also, right?
Yes, yeah, and I caution people when they make those statements. So, even if you make education and health and wealth education available, everybody's not going to really take part in it, and we need to understand that there are some people, no matter what you do, are not going to take part of it. So, what you're trying to do is make sure you're attracting and giving an opportunity to those people that really want to partake in furthering themselves individually and collectively.
Okay. Who needs your book? Educators?
I would hope that educators would start using the book to have discussions with their students because the book covers a lot of the history that got us to this point in terms of what has brought us to the point of discussing reparations. It also talks about things right up front. And let me say this, every book in the series will start with the same chapter. And that chapter discusses having uncomfortable and sometimes difficult conversations. So when you pick up a Bus Stop series book, you can expect the first chapter to be the same in each book. Because until we learn to have difficult and sometimes uncomfortable conversations, we're not going to be able to move forward. The book talks about something in education that's called critical race theory. And I don't know how many of the audience are familiar with critical race theory, but in its natural form, critical race theory is basically the ability to teach history in a more factual nature than in the nature it's been taught historically in public schools. Because historically, it's been based on a European doctrine or European philosophy and a European basis, excluding many of the contributions of people outside that European base that helped build this country. So I just encourage educators, let's get more inclusive on the historical facts. And there are many people right now, especially in certain states, in governments, that are really trying to stop the teaching of critical race theory. But their interpretation of critical race theory goes farther than the theory itself, because their philosophy in the states that are actually opposing critical race teaching is that it will cause more divisiveness. It will cause people to be farther apart. It will cause a dislike, even more distrust, and maybe hatred for white people and white Caucasian people in America. And these are things that state governments are publishing right now if you want to go out and read about it. But that's not the point. The point is, let's provide factual historical information to students. Allow those students who are very intelligent today. In fact, students today have access to more information than we've ever had. The speed of information on the internet for students is crazy. I'd rather the teacher in the classroom teach more about factual history than to allow the students to just go on the internet searching for it. So,
do you think some of their fears, those who are plagued with fear of critical race theory, some of their fears are founded? I mean, I remember when Roots came onto the scene in 1977, I was in high school. The first hit of the reality that this was a truth. It caused some guilt feelings, it caused some anger feelings, it caused some backlash, it caused everything. I mean, how can we impose critical race theory or teaching of the truth without, or can we, without angering a certain population? Or can we?
I believe we can. And I think if we do it in a factual nature, the book talks about trying not to just be emotional, but to understand what was happening in history about the time slavery was in the United States. And I'm picking slavery because that's one of the largest areas of reparation consideration. the United States had a southern sector and a northern sector. The northern sector was primarily industrial, textile in nature. The southern section of the United States was agricultural, cotton, rice, other things, okay, that they were growing. So the southern states were pretty much dependent on agricultural economics, while the northern states had both agricultural and minute form.
Phil, you're breaking up.
Am I okay now?
Hello? You're okay. I think it's on my end, but go ahead. You're okay now.
Where did I leave off at, Sandra? What was
you were saying the southern states was primarily agricultural.
Yes, okay. And at the time when slavery was in place, the southern states found slavery to be free labor or less costly labor because you still had to feed the slaves. I mean, they weren't getting income or payment, but there was a cost, but a low cost of labor. So when it came to the Emancipation Proclamation and the freeing of the slaves and the Civil War and the whole history behind that, it started way before that. It started with the Constitution. And if the Constitution is read, there's something in the Constitution originally that was called the 3/5 Compromise. And that 3/5 Compromise is also in the book. So I'm asking people to really take a historical view and factual view of what was occurring, what was happening. It's not condoning slavery. It's not condoning what occurred, but it's understanding what was happening in that historical period of time that was causing people to believe the way they were believing. It's an emotional thing for many African Americans, including myself. However, if we dwell on the emotional side, how do we go forward?
Right.
How do we go forward? We can't. It's difficult.
Well, let's just stick to the facts.
Yeah. And the facts is this is what occurred. This is what happened. I think we need to understand and know what happened because, like the Holocaust, it's best to know what occurred so we can prevent it from occurring again in the future.
Right. So, and that, people may say, oh, that was 400 years ago. You're just using it as a crutch. But fast forward to 2021, in light of the transition that we've made with education, with economics, with growth, and with decline, now we're looking at a population that was booming, the baby boomers, and a serious decline in our population. And what are we going to do? We got to tap into, like you say, the untapped markets. And that's where corporate America needs to be listening.
Yeah, and that's where I talk a lot to corporate America. How do you create an inclusive environment? Because you got to attract people you weren't attracting before. You've got to have people feel not only contribute, but they feel like they belong when they're in an organization. Because if they don't feel like they belong, your high talent people are going to find a place where they do belong. So your job right now is to grow this talent pool from diverse locations, diverse cultures, diverse people, and make sure those people, when they get in your organization, feel like it's an organization they belong into, culturally fitting and also environmentally fitting.
So basically, if corporations are not embracing everybody out there, they are going to be losing. They will not be scaling. That is the bottom line. You will not be scaling.
Let's put it this way. They will not get the top of the talent in those diverse markets.
Okay.
They'll be selling for talent that's not the top talent.
Okay. So your company, now you've traveled all around the country teaching, speaking on the inclusion. And equity, probably, yes.
Yep.
It would seem to me that in this current climate that your company should be booming.
We have clients in about every market you can name right now. Yes, we do.
Okay.
We have clients in the government sector, agencies, the broadcast sector, the educational sector, both in higher education and public K through 12. So yeah, we have a wide variety of departments, organizations that we work with. The key though is when we talk about inclusion, we work differently with each of those companies. You mentioned NPR. We work with NPR because they were very interested in making sure they didn't lose their culture of unbiased broadcasting. So we did some work with the actual reporters in NPR in terms of bias training and how we recognize bias, even if it is implicit or explicit bias. And if it's implicit bias, how is that formed? How do we recognize it? And how do we make sure it doesn't transmit itself into unfavorable behaviors? So that was NPR. We work with a school system, and I'm not at liberty to mention the school system's name because I'm under non-disclosure. But that school system had a real discrepancy between the level of disciplinary action against students of color versus white Caucasian students. It was way out of racial equality. The ratio of students of color versus the ratio of students versus the whole population of the school system was way out of kilter. So that's when we looked at their practices, policies, and procedures for disciplinary action to maybe make some suggestions on how we look at that and how we get that ratio back in sync. So it's not just, well, I'll give you the numbers. The school system had 12% minority students, children of color, 60% of the penalty and punishment was students of color to 12%.
Okay, that's the problem.
Yeah. So, and we didn't go in pointing fingers at where it was. We went in investigating and doing analysis. And that basically we did root cause analysis for that client to begin to look at what some of the possible causes were and what we could do to move the needle in a favorable direction.
So that's some of the things that your company will do. And you travel international as well. Is that correct?
I have not been international yet, except virtually, to be honest with you. But I'll tell you, another school system we're working with how to develop and work with culturally responsive curriculum. And we're actually working with that school on their existing curriculum and how do we incorporate some of the factual historical things that occurred that we talked about, and also how we relate to students today based on the environment they're in. If you're in an inner city school and the people are talking about farms and growing crops, how many crops have you seen growing out of sidewalks and asphalt? So it's not something they relate to. So how do you relate that? How do you bring that subject into relationship with someone that may have never seen a farm? So you've got to make a connection so they can have the ability to tie it. And some of the things we've done with some of those schools, we've actually started greenhouses or planters in their school. So they're actually growing things. I mean, just some type of relational basis that people culturally can connect. So, awesome. I mean, it's all over the place what we do with clients, but the string that goes through everything is inclusion. How do we create a more inclusive environment? How do we create a more inclusive culture? Period.
With the pandemic, everything is a pandemic nowadays, but with the pandemic, I'm just wondering, because it feels like the level of empathy that has been bestowed upon each other has decreased with the pandemic.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Is that a falsity from your corporate perspective, your business perspective? Do you see that now you're dealing with including or teaching inclusiveness on a cultural level? The rural kids and the urban children have to learn to come together and learn each other's language. And now are you having to globally teach or speak on the subject of empathy? Like, we need empathy. We need it really bad. We need to be able to identify emotionally with other humans in order to make and I feel like the pandemic has made that situation worse. I mean, the level of road rage even.
We're working with one client right now, a very large client, and all we're working on is reintroducing connectivity between the people in their organization, because they've disconnected because they've all been remote. And now they're bringing them back into buildings, they're bringing them back into facilities. And this is almost 2 years that they haven't been in there, a year and a half. So the connectivity between the people, not just from a team building and working standpoint, but from an ethnic standpoint, a racial standpoint, it's got a little bit uncomfortable because they've seen things watching media at home during the pandemic that have maybe I don't want to say inflamed, but have really exaggerated some of the difficulties we have both ethnically, racially, and so forth. I mean, how many people have not seen the George Floyd tape?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you talk about emotional on all sides. Aubrey.
Right.
How many people have not seen that video? I mean, you think about this, and then you get the facts and statistics now, because now people are giving you statistics that more people of color are likely to be brutally injured or killed through law enforcement than people not of color. So, I mean, you're getting all this media and all this talk, and these people, we've been home for a year and a half. We've all been seeing this. We've all been watching this. And so now we come back together. So we need to come back together in a different format than pre-pandemic.
I feel like we need some hope.
And when you say empathy, there's only one way to get empathy. If I don't know you, if I'm not connected with you, if I haven't really sit down to interact with you, I can't have empathy for you. I don't know you.
Right.
So if I'm going to have empathy for someone, I've got to get to know them. It doesn't mean I'm going to like them. It doesn't mean I'm going to agree with them. But it is a place of understanding, mutual understanding. So that's why we encourage you to work and talk and interact with people different than yourself, whatever that difference might be.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. I've been talking with Phil Claybrooke of Metrics to Results.
Sandra, if I may, before we go real quick.
Yes.
Just real quick. You'll find out at the end of the book, when you read the author's notes and summary at the end of the book, in 2022, we will be starting our way of serving the underserved communities. We'll be running what we call the Pathways Institute, and we're going to be focusing on a nonprofit organization that brings education for both health and wealth to underserved communities through what we do in our training as an addition. And we're going to set aside a separate nonprofit organization to actually go do that type of training, because it's up to us also, not just to talk, but to act. And we're going to go in and train and do what we can to educate entrepreneurs and work in conjunction with employers to bring about suitable arrangements for people that may be suited for their company or their industry. Okay. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
We had a comment. Oh, Diane, she said, remind me. I sent Diane a text earlier. She says communication is key. Thank you, Diane, for your comment. Communication is key. And connectivity. He's also was saying connectivity. But anyway, I'm not going to keep you any longer, Phil. I appreciate you. Phil Claybrooke from Metrics to Results.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you for your audience. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. A leadership consulting company just released their first book in the Bus Stop series. This one is The Question of Reparations. You can get that on Amazon or the link above. And you've been watching Passion Speak, where we give those with a passion a platform to speak. Connect with Phil. He's also open for collaboration. I reached out to some of my PhD people, comrades that I know, and said he is open for collaboration. I know some inclusion professors that will probably also be open to collaboration. So anyway, thank you, Phil, for your time. I appreciate you, and I appreciate our audience, and we'll see you next time.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.